It started like any other day, quiet and uneventful, until I found myself face to face with an overly aggressive cop demanding my ID without reason. She came out of nowhere, flashing her badge and barking orders like she owned the street. Her tone was sharp, her stare unrelenting, and her demands completely unjustified. I hadn't done anything wrong, but suddenly I was being treated like a criminal. As I calmly asked why she needed my ID, her frustration grew, and so did my suspicion. Was this about power, or was she just looking for a fight? Either way, I wasn't about to back down. I knew my rights, and I wasn't going to let them be trampled. The situation quickly escalated, with her pushing boundaries and me standing my ground. What happened next took everything to a whole new level, and you won't believe how it all went down. I could feel my heart racing, but I kept my voice steady. "Officer, can you tell me what this is about?" I asked, trying to keep things calm. Her eyes narrowed, and she ignored my question, snapping back, "Just hand over your ID, now." The way she said it felt less like a request and more like a threat. People nearby started to glance our way, sensing the tension, but no one stepped in. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I hadn't broken any laws. I wasn't speeding, jaywalking, or causing trouble. So why was she so insistent? Was this a case of mistaken identity, or was there something else going on here? As she moved closer, I realized this wasn't just about following orders. This was about standing up for myself and my rights. But every second felt like the situation could spiral out of control. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, but her tone was starting to draw a line in the sand. "Ma'am, I know my rights," I said firmly, keeping my hands visible and my voice even. That seemed to strike a nerve. Her expression shifted, her frustration bubbling over as she stepped even closer, invading my space. "You think you know the law better than me?" She snapped, her hand hovering near her belt. I could feel the weight of her authority pressing down, but I wasn't about to let fear dictate my actions. I wasn't being disrespectful or uncooperative. I was simply asking for a valid reason for her demands. Nearby, a few more people started to watch. Their curious eyes only made her more tense, as though she didn't like being questioned in front of an audience. The air felt thick with tension. I had no idea how far she'd push this, but I knew one thing: I wasn't backing down. Her voice grew sharper, and her stance became more aggressive. "If you don't hand over your ID right now, we're going to have a serious problem," she said, her eyes locked on mine. The crowd around us grew, a mix of silent bystanders and murmuring voices, all watching to see what would happen next. I kept my ground, my voice steady despite the adrenaline rushing through me. "Officer, I'm happy to comply if you can explain what law I've broken. But without that, I don't have to show my ID." My words seemed to push her over the edge. She stepped closer, her hand now resting firmly on her holster, though she hadn't drawn her weapon. Yet, the tension was unbearable. Was this really going to escalate further? My mind raced, considering my options. Around us, people pulled out their phones, recording every moment. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. Just as the tension reached its peak, a voice cut through the heavy silence. "Is there a problem here, officer?" A man stepped forward from the crowd, his suit and badge identifying him as a plainclothes detective. His presence was unexpected, and for a brief moment, I thought it might de-escalate the situation. The officer's demeanor shifted slightly, though her grip on control didn't waver. "This individual is refusing to comply with a lawful order," she said quickly, her tone defensive. The detective studied the scene, his eyes flicking between her, me, and the growing crowd. "Did you explain why you need his ID?" he asked calmly. Her hesitation was palpable. "It's standard procedure," she replied, avoiding a direct answer. But I could see the crack in her confidence. The detective turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Do you have any reason to believe this is targeted harassment?" he asked, catching me off guard. The question hung in the air, raising the stakes and leaving everyone waiting for my response. I looked at the detective, my mind racing. Honestly, I don't know what's going on. "She hasn't told me why she needs my ID," I said, keeping my voice steady. The detective nodded thoughtfully and turned back to the officer. "Officer, unless you can articulate a specific reason for this stop, we need to move on." "This isn't how we operate," he said firmly. Her face flushed, and for a moment, it seemed like she might push back. But then, almost reluctantly, she took a step back. "This isn't over," she muttered, before turning and walking away, leaving the crowd buzzing with murmurs. I thought it was done, but just as I started to feel relieved, the detective leaned in closer. "You should file a report. This isn't the first time we've had complaints about her." The revelation hit me hard. This wasn't just about me, it was a bigger issue. As I walked away, the weight of what had just happened sank in. It wasn't just about standing up for myself. It was about standing up for everyone who's been put in a similar position. As I walked back to my car, I couldn't help but replay the whole encounter in my mind. The way she'd approached me, the detective's intervention, and the truth he revealed, it all felt surreal. Part of me was relieved it didn't escalate further, but another part couldn't shake the thought of how many others might have been caught in similar situations without anyone stepping in. Before driving off, I sat for a moment to process everything. This wasn't just about knowing my rights. It was about staying calm and standing firm in the face of intimidation. And it reminded me how important it is to hold people accountable, no matter their position. I decided I would file that report, not out of spite, but because it mattered. If no one speaks up, nothing changes. As I pulled onto the road, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and resolve. This wasn't just an encounter, it was a lesson.